everybody, and welcome to This Week in Indies for February 21st, 2021. We have an incredible show for you. We're going to be a little controversial, I think, today. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But it's a very interesting topic nonetheless, and a topic that we're finding so often to talk about every single year. We seem to have one of these incidences that happen. So we'll get into that on the other side of the roundtable. We have the roundtable discussion on the other side. But right now, I have a great review of a great book for you from our great book reviewer herself, E.G. Stone. So enjoy that, and we'll see you in a few.
This illustrated novel tells the tale of a dystopian future where, following a war that nearly devastated humanity, the survivors partnered with artificial intelligence to create a brighter future. The people enjoy a virtual utopia every night by using interactive dream technology, but their computer-generated dreams are the only source of entertainment available. The AI determined that the root cause of all harmful human behaviors was uncontrolled emotions, but balanced, harmonious emotions are an integral aspect of wellness. It concluded that the only way to reliably achieve that was to eliminate emotion while a person was awake, then provide a safe way to experience the complete range of human emotions while engaged in dreaming. This story follows a man who struggles to hide the fact that he can still feel a low level of emotions during the day. He must keep his secret emotions and his mind strictly controlled through the use of meditation, but he continues to make that harder and harder to accomplish when his life is on the line. Alright, Dreaming Your Dream by Starwing is a sort of dystopian noir piece, which is always fun, but then I like noir quite a lot. It is following a man named John who, despite the fact that everyone else cannot feel emotions during the day, is still able to feel things. And he discovers that things are not quite what he thought they were, and perhaps he isn't the only one. And yes, anyways, so this book follows his life for a while. We experience his reality during the day, and then we also get the story interspersed with various dream sequences as we follow his activities. And now generally these dream sequences are, well, they're dreams. They're not always logical, or the emotions are very wide-ranged. And then during the day, he feels, kind of not a lot. Now, granted, not a lot is still more than most people who feel nothing, so John has to be very careful not to alert other people or the AI that he has in his apartment that runs a bunch of other things, that he can still feel stuff. Only it's not quite that easy. So I can't tell you a whole lot about the rest of the plot of this book because that would involve spoilers for the novel and that would be bad. But I can say that I found it very interesting that the story was, daytime activities interspersed with dream activities. And the dream activities didn't seem related to the daytime activities until about halfway through the novel-ish, I guess. But once you figured out how they were related and what was going on, it was absolutely fascinating to watch. I really enjoyed it. I found the prose a little bit difficult to get into at first, simply because it was portraying an emotionless, flat existence, and I have a really hard time reading prose that does that. Now, this did it intentionally, and as you keep reading and as things keep progressing, it makes a lot more sense, and it also becomes a lot more interesting. And while it still technically maintains some of that flatness at various points, the story itself comes through the prose with such intent. And I think the interactions with the other people who were sort of in the same situation as John really made the story. I think that was probably the most interesting. Now, as far as the characters go, John was obviously my favorite. I think Celeste was probably just as interesting for entirely different reasons, especially at the end. Oh, the ending was really, really good. So especially at the end, but I can't tell you any more about that because, that's a thing. I think, though, that Kira, which is she's kind of a cornerstone sort of a thing for John, I think she was the one I had the hardest time understanding. Now, she is seen mostly at the beginning of the story, and as the story progresses, we understand more about John's life and all of the things that are going on, but the beginning bits with Kira, I think, are the harder for me to at least wrap my brain around. Now, that being said, the progression of the character development throughout the story leads up to the really, really, really fascinating ending, which I liked a lot. It does leave a few questions unanswered, but I think that's intentional. I think this is meant to be the first in a series, but I don't know if it actually needs a second book. I mean, I, of course, would like to know more because I like knowing more about things, but it doesn't really need it, and I think that is done really quite well. The only part of this story that I didn't really get were the illustrations. Now, they were perfectly good illustrations. They were very interesting. I think they managed to portray what they were trying to portray very well. I don't often see a lot of stories of this sort, specifically probably noir, probably dystopian, that have illustrations so frequently or even at all. And for me, that's a little harder to wrap my brain around because it pulls me out of the story when I'm not expecting it. Granted, this is totally personal preference sort of a thing. If that sort of thing doesn't really pull you out of a story, then you won't notice it at all. It's very quite good. It works well. The illustrations are well done. But for me, it was just, okay, I'm immersed into this story. I'm very interested in what's going on. And then, oh, there's an illustration. And that took me a moment to go and say, oh, wait, this is a book. And here's the story and here's what it's trying to do. And then get back into the book and into the story. Again, personal preference. It doesn't really matter. But on the whole, I would say this book was really quite good. I was published, I want to say late last year, but I'm not entirely sure on the publication date. I know it was 2020, I just can't remember the exact month or day for that matter. So it's fairly recent, fairly new, and it's definitely worth a read. If you're interested in this book, all of the links should be down below, and you can find all of that stuff there. Otherwise, have a great day, go cause some trouble. That's pretty much all I've got. I shall see you next time. Bye. I'm constantly reading books, like a lot of books. But my list never gets smaller.
And welcome to the Go Indie Now Roundtable discussion for this week. Oh, we got a doozy for you folks. As you can see, I've got a great panel here with me. As you know, it seems like I don't know what it is about February and why. I mean, last year we had RWA. The year before that we had Cockygate. I mean, it just seems like controversy follows February for some reason in the literary world, especially in the indie literary world, which is just strange and unusual. And we have another controversial subject matter to talk about. Now, before I get the panel involved here and have them introduce themselves, which I'm going to have them do here in a second, and talk about this, I want to preface a couple things because this is there's a lot of variables to this. There's everything has two sides to every story, but also keep in mind that we're here as a community. Okay. So I will not personally tolerate vile behavior and language and rhetoric. Your opinions are valid and they belong to you, and I am totally on board with all of that. You can have your own opinion about whatever you want to have, but what we discuss here, I want to have a rational, intellectual conversation about it. I do not want this to become a shouting match. I do not want this to become I'm right, you're wrong. That's not the purpose of what we're about to do here. So with that being said, we're going to talk about this subject matter. Like I said, with the group that I have here, I'm going to have them introduce themselves first, and then we'll get to talking about it. So, Alex, since you're the veteran of the group today, I'll have you start so that you can show everybody else how to do it. And yes, take us away, sir.
Hey guys, I'm Alexander Gideon, author of dark fantasy, science fiction, historical fantasy. My writing style can best be summed up by the phrase, "and many people died." I am the author of the Books of the Law series from the Shadow Council Archives, published by Falstaff Books. First book in the series is A Web of Crimson. Series features Aleister Crowley as the main character. Starts off where his story pretty much starts in his real life with the Golden Dawn. The first book is him investigating the Golden Dawn for its possible hand in trying to take over the British Empire.
Thank you, sir. All right, let's have Cully introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm a British author and I write high fantasy. I've currently got a series named A Voice That Thunders, and I've got 4 books in that series out at the moment. So the first one is A Voice That Thunders, A Scream That Shatters, A Fire That Whispers, and A Vow That Clashes. And these last 2 books, they're basically, I've got 2 protagonists. So this book here is following Mira, the female, and this book here is following her brother, Gabe. As I said, it's high fantasy, and it's based on Mesopotamian mythology.
Awesome.
That's me.
Beautiful covers.
Thank you.
Yeah, those are gorgeous. All right, Sean?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sean Valiente. I'm a new indie author. I don't have a book with me today, unfortunately, but my first book is called The Lightning Knight. It's the first in a long-planned series. It's classic fantasy hero's tale that's kind of twisted on its edge a little bit, and it's kind of like hanging out with an old friend or eating your favorite food kind of fantasy. So it's pretty exciting. It's available now, and if you like, the classic tropes of fantasy and a hero's tale and magic and dragons and all that fun stuff, it's a really great book.
Well, when everybody who's here in our chat and amongst us right now goes and gets your book, Sean, you'll see how gorgeous his cover is as well, because it's a nice cover as well. I really liked it. I thought it was really nice.
I was lucky enough to have my sister-in-law design it, so
nice.
She did a wonderful job.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's got a big knight on the tail. Everything that you would like if you're a fantasy guy, not fantasy guy, a fantasy person. Not big knight with a big sword. It's pretty awesome. And you already have a fan, Cully. Somebody is enjoying our friend Regine. Says he loves the myths of Mesopotamia.
Yeah, so do I.
So yeah, Regine, you might want to go check that out. It's just to let everybody know that all the links to everybody here and everything we've talked about, everything that is there is now in the description. So if you don't see it where you're at, refresh your browser because they are there. I put them all in just prior to starting the show. So everything is there. So everybody's books, all the links, go check them out. Go get them right now. Probably want to stay away from BAEN books for a while because right now they're in a little bit of hot water. So let me preface this for everybody. Let me set it up, and then we'll get you guys involved in the conversation here. But so what has happened basically is about earlier this week, or maybe 4 or 5 days ago, an independent author who, in fairness, to be completely fair here, was a rejected author from BAEN Books. He had applied to BAEN Books several times and was rejected. I don't know if that's going to taint what is going on with what is happening That is for everybody else to decide. I am just presenting what I know. All right. His name is Jason Sanford, and on his Patreon page, he posted a long blog about BAEN Books and in particular, their forum. He absolves BAEN Books to an extent in the article. Again, being fair, I've read it several times. At the very end, he does, state that he's not sure that this is BAEN Books' fault or whatever. He does. I mean, he slants it either way. Sometimes it just depends on where you're reading it and how you're reading it, I guess. But he talks about how BAEN Books' forum has become a toxic environment where he was personally getting violent threats against him because he did not believe with the political views that were being bandied about on the forum. Also, a lot of people were threatening violence if you didn't agree with certain people's opinions. There's several blogs out there. There's several sites, news sites. I'm not just talking about authors and jaded authors. There are news sites out there that have taken screenshots of Twitter posts and posts from the forum that have now been removed. They got those beforehand, and those posts show a lot of what Jason has been talking about, where there are some violent threats, and it really, some of them are idle, some of them are not. Some of them are very scary, and this is a very real thing. But all of this took place on BAEN Books' site. Their forum is on their website. It has been there for a very long time. They are pioneers in the science fiction publishing world, especially in the indie realm. They've been publishing since 1984. And this is not the first time that they've been without controversy. In 2019, they also had some controversy when they released an anthology which was based solely on anybody named David. So they had an anthology where all the authors were named David. And in that anthology, a lot of people were saying, the way to diversify. It was basically 10 white males who basically wrote for this anthology. And that you can go and see the whole sort of tale there. That is in the past, but that is just give you context of what is going on here. Now, BAEN Books has been around for a long time. They have a good reputation. They have, in terms of being publisher and in the world, they have been advocates for free speech in the past, and they do have, all sides of the spectrum, but they have been more skewed toward a conservative mindset lately in their publishing, and that you can just see. I mean, it's apparent if you go through their books. But that being said, the publisher Tony Weisskopf did release a statement, and I want to read you that statement just real quickly. It says, "To whom it may concern, what is it that we do at BAEN Books? We publish books at the heart of science fiction and fantasy. Science fiction has traditionally been a unique kind of intellectual pleasure, a process of glorious intercommunication and inspiration, with ideas flowing from scientist and engineer to writer and artist, to reader and viewer, back and forth, in a delightful melange of shared thoughts, wild speculation, cautionary tales, reality checks, and sheer fun of playing with boundaries and ideas. It is not for everyone, but those who enjoy it take great pleasure in the dialogue." When the modern form of science fiction began with Hugo Gernsback and other pulp magazines of the earliest 20th century, publishers fostered that interaction through letter columns in magazines and by encouraging science fiction readers to organize in clubs and meet in conventions. BAEN Books continued this tradition with BAEN's Bar, a kind of virtual convention and online conversation that has been around for some form for over 20 years. The moderators are volunteers. The readers, editors, and writers post and interact on the bar at their own desire. Some conversations have gone over so many times they've been retired as simply too boring to contemplate again. Sometimes the rhetoric can get heated. We do not endorse the publication of unlawful speech. We have received no complaints about the content of the bar from its users. That said, it has come to our attention that allegations about the bar have been made elsewhere. We take these allegations seriously and consequently have put the bar on hiatus while we investigate. But we will not commit to censorship of lawful speech. It is not BAEN Books' policy to police the opinions of its readers, authors, and artists, its editors, or indeed anyone else. This applies to posts at the bar or social media or their own websites, or indeed anywhere else. Or indeed anywhere else. On the bar, the publisher does not select what is allowed to be posted and does not hijack an individual's messages for their own purposes. Similarly, the posts do not represent the publisher's opinion, except in a deep belief that free speech is worthy of itself. All right, I've yapped enough about this. And I will say that a few conventions that had Tony as their keynote speaker have asked her not to come and have pulled this out. Have pulled her out of being a part of it. One in particular that's very, very prominent, WorldCon has taken her away and basically told her that we're not allowing you to come to our convention, and we're withdrawing you from keynote speaking. So those things all aside, it's hard when you read that statement. It's hard to not see the contradictions in what she's saying, and it's very hard when there's blogs and there are articles on both sides of this issue, and a lot of people are trying to debunk Jason Sanford, and Jason Sanford's trying to debunk BAEN Books, and it's going back and forth. However, there is evidence out there about this, about violent behavior, and so I'm curious from all of you what your thoughts are, how you look at this in terms of your own brand, and has this given you some thought about what is out there and social media in general?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of different points to jump in and step in on this issue, right? Kind of the main roundtable discussion today is about sort of looking at this and then talking about kind of our own personal brands and perspectives. But I think a bigger point needs to be made if we take it from like a little 35,000 foot view about, not only what is sci-fi and fantasy and that realm of genre really about, but also what these kind of forums really mean and what kind of words we're using, right? So if we're talking about sci-fi and fantasy, I mean, at the heart, these are genres about allegory about our own world, just set in a different, time, set in a different place, set in a different fantastical world. On the simplest explanation of it, it's like X-Men, right? So X-Men is an allegory for, how different people are treated. Well, what if they were actually treated like the monsters that we thought they were, right? So it could be an allegory for anybody. When X-Men was created, it was kind of an allegory for the homosexual community, right? Like people, and we're thinking like, oh, these are monsters. And like, okay, well, what if, we made a comic book and, this sci-fi fantasy comic book about like, yeah, well, what if, they were treated as monsters, and you can see, how that treatment is seen and heard from the perspective of these people, right? So that's what sci-fi and fantasy is really all about. But this forum in particular was really just a cesspool of hate speech and everything that goes against sci-fi and fantasy in a publishing house forum for sci-fi and fantasy. And they talk about free speech and, not policing it, but they're not talking about a different word, which is accountability. If I'm hosting this roundtable in my own house instead of online, and I'm hosting it every week and I'm allowing anybody to join, and, they're saying whatever they want, and a lot of that comes down to hate speech, or a lot of that comes down to inciting violence, then it's on me as the person who owns the house to say, hey, this isn't, acceptable within my own house. And I don't think, the publishing house was taking any responsibility for that. So there's a lot that's going on with this particular issue, besides kind of how we as indie authors take this and say, okay, how do we apply some of these things to our own brands, right? We have to get to the heart of, what does this say about our genre if we allow, a small subset of loud people to kind of take over and say, hey, this is what we want to say, and it's a free country, but there's nowhere, in our Constitution or even in any constitution around the world that says, you can have free speech, but you can't have accountability. Like, that's the whole point. So I think that's kind of maybe the starting point of how we start to think about our own brands and say, okay, I can say whatever I want. And while that's, my prerogative and my right, it's a privilege to be held accountable by other people, especially if I'm, if I say I'm a quote unquote fantasy author and I want people to read my books, I have a responsibility to say what I want, but also to be held accountable for what I'm saying.
Excellent. That's absolutely excellent. And Anita agrees with you. She says, in her opinion, free speech should not be free of common sense, courtesy, and responsibility of actions. That was awesome, Sean. Very, very well said.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, it's hard when, and we've all met those people, right, who say a lot of things eloquently, and then you're like, well, I can't argue against them, but I don't think I agree with what they say, but they're saying it in such a way. It's like, that friend who always is like talking like super philosophically, and you're like, wait a second, you're talking a bunch of bull crap right now. You have no way of articulating that because they're using words and they're using complete sentences and you're just going everywhere, right? And a lot of times, this happens in those types of forums, right? And we're talking about a forum of, a couple of maybe 1,000 active members, and that's not reflective of, the whole sci-fi, fantasy, or even indie community as a whole, but they're very loud. They're very in your face, and they're part of this brand that we hold so dear, right? Because, BAEN Publishing is, this bastion of like, they went at the big publishing houses and they're saying, hey, we're going to, support indie authors. And as indie authors ourselves, we are so like thankful for, anyone who's like, hey, here's another book or here's another story that, didn't go the traditional route, but is still just as good. So we get a little bit hurt when a different mindset or a different group comes in and says, hey, I may think differently, but not only beyond that, I'm going to hate and I'm going to incite violence. And that's really the difference, right? There's a million, sci-fi fantasy books or even, any genre that has a wide political range of ideas. But it's when you start to say, okay, here's my idea, but also I'm going to start adding hate to it. And also I'm going to start inciting violence. And also I'm going to start delving into the worst parts of the conversation and not really just trying to have constructive conversation. And then they fall back and say, oh no, cancel culture. And it's not cancel culture. I think when you hear cancel culture, you can instead substitute that and say accountability culture. Like, oh no, we're not canceling you. We're holding you accountable for what you're saying, and it's not what's it called when you're supposed to, we can't say anything anymore. Politically correctness, right? Okay. It's not being politically correct. It's having empathy for other people. And I think if we start to substitute those words when people use them in sentences, you start to say, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense. You sound like you're saying, a bunch of bull crap. You're not being held to be politically correct. You're held to be empathetic towards other people. And once we start to think about that, then, forums like this start to make less sense about not policing free speech or anything like that. And then when you tailor that into your own brand, right, you start to think to yourself, like, I personally, I have a lot of strong held beliefs, and there's one side of me, as an indie author on like the profit side that's like, well, I don't want to, discourage people from reading my books because they see my beliefs. And then on the other side of me, I'm like, well, I have these strong beliefs, but, how convicted am I in them? Am I convicted enough to say, well, if you don't believe, or if you don't agree with what, not what I have to say, but with my ability to say it as an author, then am I okay with you saying you don't want to support me as a book? And that's a hard line to toe, especially as an indie author, when, it's like every book matters that's sold, and not, you don't have the traditional backing of a big 4 or big 5 publisher, or big 3 soon, right? So it's such a hard line, and figuring out where you're convicted, and then you think about going back to the stories you love and the stories that you write and saying, okay, well, how would my own character, respond to this, whether it's sci-fi or fantasy? And then it goes back to, okay, well, sci-fi fantasy is an allegory for life, and trying to figure that out. And it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, that's, you have to measure your own decency at that point too. How far do you want to take it? And how do you feel comfortable with what you're saying? And how you justify it, right? Because a lot of this is just screaming. It's just people screaming because they feel like that's the only way they get heard, or that's the only way that they want to do this, because they've read that that's an effective tool. Whether it is or not, that's debatable, but I personally don't think so. But whatever, it doesn't matter. But that's how they approach things, and that approach has garnered a lot more look at it than, you've put a lot more spotlight on yourself than possibly you didn't have to do from the beginning. But
I think too, it depends. It comes down to the hills you're willing to die on. Mm-hmm. And like for me, I am outspokenly a very leftist person. It's all over everything, I am outspoken about controversial matters. I am definitely someone who I've been to the protests for Black Lives Matter. I've been right there. I've been tear gassed. I'm one of those people, and I'm going to die on that hill, and that's my choice. And I've got to accept the consequences of those choices, where I know that there are readers and, people who may follow me that are going to leave because of that. And I am okay with that. I have to be okay. Mm-hmm. With BAEN, and with what I'm seeing, the thing that gets me the most, especially with their statement, was the fact that before anything, they had to make a statement about intellectualism, which to me is equating speech about, killing people who don't believe the same way that you do, attacking cities, inciting violence, inciting insurrection, is speech that they support as intellectualism. And that tells me everything I need to know about BAEN books. You want to say that you are, in the middle ground and you support all speech and everything, but with statements like that, you support some speech more than you support others. And when you allow people to not only have that kind of speech on your platform, but you allow your moderators to take part in said speech and allow them to attack people who have difference of opinion, which I have my own opinions on said opinions. When your opinions, opinions are valid, but when your opinions start to be about hurting other people and about denying other people basic rights, I think your opinion's a lot less valid at that point, personally. But this is the hill they're choosing to die on, and we're seeing it, in a lot of cases. Another person I can think of that's got a hill that they're willing to die on that is, going to hurt them in the long run is J.K. Rowling with her anti-trans rhetoric. I mean, she wrote an entire book that is basically anti-trans. And so what hills are you willing to die on? And the thing is that they're willing to die on this hill, but they're not willing to accept the consequences of making that choice. And you have to accept those consequences.
I mean, you know very well, too, writing about Aleister Crowley, who, for a lot of people, is a very controversial figure in his own right.
Oh, exactly. And when I write him, I have made the choice to fictionalize him in a way that downplays a lot of the worst parts of him. Of course, he's still, someone, it's in the books. I mean, he is still someone who is very promiscuous in a time where that's not necessarily as accepted. He is at this point a light drug user, so it's not in the prose as much as it will be later in the series. As things develop, and he's also very famously bisexual, and that's something that's going to play in as well. And so I made the choice to write this character, but I'm also making the choice to downplay, a lot of the. I mean, he was a misogynist. He really was, and I am not someone who finds that acceptable. So I'm not going to write a character like that, and I'm going to take the consequences of people who are, learned in Aleister Crowley and are, consider themselves like scholars of Aleister Crowley and his life and his history, who are going to be angry about that, and I don't care. I am not going to write that. If you are not going to read my book because of that, then that's fine. That's completely fine to me. And I accept those consequences of the choices that I make.
Alex, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
So I think one thing that I've seen come up with, other books or even other, historical figures in real life or anything like that is when an author of either a book or an article or, TV series or whatever medium decides to pick and choose and cherry pick different aspects of a person's life and amplify them and then diminish other aspects, for whatever narrative they're trying to tell. Often a lot of people, don't agree with the heroification of that character, right? For instance, we hold in the United States, we hold Thomas Jefferson in high esteem for writing the Declaration of Independence, first Secretary of State, and all of that. But then we sometimes diminish his, thoughts on slavery and being a slave owner. And, people will come in and say, hey, like, why are we, heroifying Thomas Jefferson when he was also a bad dude? And I think you'll see or notice that basically everybody, whether they're historical or fictionalized, is not great in every aspect. But how do you deal with that, kind of idea of, people will say to you, well, you wanted to write about Aleister Crowley, but you wanted to do it in this certain way. And by doing it in that way, you're lending readers to kind of see him in a better light than what he really was. And why are you okay with that?
Some of that for Aleister Crowley is that he progressed through his life into what he became at the end. I mean, he became someone. He was basically a cult leader by the end. I mean, with Thelma, with the conditions that he had, and I mean to the point that he was abusing the people that were, with him and believing in these things that he was showing. So some of what I've thought, and I don't want to give away where stories are going and everything, but my thought is there is a possibility that by the end of this series, he is the villain. Because, for all of us, he started off as a rich kid, really. That's kind of where he started. And he started off as someone who wanted to be seen as an intellectual, as, a great mind. And, I mean, he had a huge rivalry with W.B. Yeats in the Golden Dawn because he was so much better of a writer than Aleister Crowley was. And, Crowley really didn't take that well. But it went through the years as his hedonism, as his misogyny and everything grew from where it was in the beginning. And that's kind of where I'm trying to take it. About the only thing that I'm not putting in for him as much, he's got a little bit of it. He's got some of the chauvinism in the way he treats Elaine Simpson, who is kind of she's a secondary character, but she's also a main character, really. But I don't want to write a character that is as misogynistic as he was. And so,
why is that? Why don't you want to write that kind of character?
Because I don't want to propagate that kind of rhetoric. I don't want to further that rhetoric. But I also don't want to fully downplay the fact that this man was not a good man. But he also did some good things. I mean, to the point that, one of the craziest things is that he was known as the wickedest man in the world. And that was very widespread. And to the point that he single-handedly undermined the German sympathetic movement in New York simply by going there and supporting it. And people found it so distasteful to support something that was also supported by the wickedest man in the world that it actually undermined the movement. And so I have to be true to that. And I have to make him into a character that makes sense for. But I'm not starting there. And I mean, there's events that happen in the second book that start the kind of, downhill progression for him of becoming that wickedest man in the world. And so I want to be true to a point, but I also don't want to make it seem that, one, I support that kind of viewpoint, especially, the heavy misogyny that he had. And two, I don't want to make that viewpoint seem acceptable just because it's true to the actual character. And so you walk this fine line, especially with characters as controversial as Aleister Crowley, of, how close do you get without making it seem like a villain is a good guy. And it's that, and you don't want it to be, I don't want, hating women to be sympathetic in any way.
Cully, I'd be interested to know or hear, like, how much of your own personal kind of beliefs and theories on, like, the world and, kind of where you stand on things goes into your book series, because you have I forgot, 4 books already. And so, like, I mean, that's a lot of space to kind of weave in, beliefs, whether they're personal or not personal.
Do you know, I was just thinking that as they were talking. I don't actually put much of my own personal beliefs into my books. I keep it separate. I'm probably one of the most unpolitical people I know. I definitely have opinions on things. I'm very opinionated about things, but I don't always feel that I need to share that with everybody. So as far as my books go, I'm looking at a mythology that pretty much was lost because nobody could translate the cuneiform tablets until around 150 years ago. So for me, it's more about trying to, I mean, I write fantasy for escapism, but I do focus on mythology, and I think mythology is something that can be used to tackle difficult subjects. And it's also helpful for looking at our place in the world. But I think for me, it's more about putting the mythology that was lost back into context. So I've read some authors that use a similar mythology, but they've more or less done it in a more of a urban fantasy way, and more of a with a sort of like our century culture is embedded into it, sort of like more around like angels and demons and Nephilim and things like that.
It's very common.
It's very like from a Hebraic point of view, but the Mesopotamian point of view was completely opposite. It was a completely different point of view. They saw these beings that they believed came into the world in a completely different light. They saw them more in a positive light. So for me, it's just about trying to re-envisage that mythology, but more in line with the culture and the context of when it was written, rather than our culture today, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
I'm curious, Cully. You mentioned you have your own opinions on things and stuff like that. So when you're advertising through social media and you're putting, things out there and people are having discussions about things. Are you more careful about, again, because your books don't reflect an opinion, especially a current opinion.
No.
So are you more careful because of that aspect that you're trying to reflect your books? You're the author of these books. So are you trying to reflect that, staying away from these conversations more? Is that how you're protecting your brand? Or do you feel like you are engaging in these conversations and still, promoting your brand?
To be honest, I have not done much social media. I mean, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and things like that, but only because I'm an author. But I've only released my first book in 2019, and I was basically writing. Never really thought about marketing. Sorry, excuse my dog. Never really thought about marketing until I published my first book. So all of this side of things is new to me. It's for things for me to think about. And I've never been on forums. That forum post that Joe sent me was the first time I'd read anything about it. I don't know that publishing company. It felt to me like they were a bit hijacked, but at the same time, there was no accountability there. If thinking of my brand, I mean, I haven't even got a website yet. So, but if thinking of my branding, when I get to that stage, then I wouldn't want people to be forcing their opinions on anything and like pushing an agenda. I would be policing that, if that makes sense.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting, Joe, to try and like tie this a little bit back to sort of being publishing and everything, is that, us as authors, and you just heard from kind of all three of us, we all have, opinions and thoughts and convictions that we stand for, right? Whether they're in our writing, whether they're not, whether they're in our writing and they're diminished in some way on purpose, so we're not exemplifying things we don't agree with, or whether they're not in, a book entirely because we're trying to represent, mythologies and cultures from a time past, or anything like that. It's kind of like to make a Hamilton musical reference. If you don't stand for nothing, then what will you fall for? And that's kind of what BAEN Publishing has fallen into. They're not really standing for anything. They're kind of using the boilerplate, free speech, and it's a forum for people to come and meet and talk and stuff, but they're not standing up for anything, and that doesn't really sit right. As authors, we all stand for something, whether that's on our social media, whether that's through our books, whether that's, a non-negative where we're not exemplifying something, and that's how what we're standing for. But BAEN Publishing isn't, and I think that speaks a lot about them as a publishing house and what they really care about most. And that might not be about publishing, or that might not be about the authors. It might mean more about they care about money, which is unfortunate, right? Because this forum is meant for people to be gathered under the BAEN Publishing, name brand, in order to drive people to BAEN Publishing, in order to drive people to get their books under their authors. And, it's great that they can support indie authors and all of that, but ultimately they're saying in their statement, we don't stand for anything. We just want people to, come buy our books, which doesn't exemplify what any author feels. And specifically for a sci-fi fantasy publishing house, doesn't exemplify what sci-fi fantasy is all about.
Yeah.
So they hide under the facade of, free speech, and they forget about accountability, and they forget about who their audience is, which is a bunch of sci-fi fantasy people who have read all of these books, who have grown up, reading these stories and learning like, hey, there's a lot of different people out there, and we should treat them with respect, even if we think differently than them. We still have to have empathy for them. And, that's not what was in this forum. And that's not what was being moderated, like Alex was saying. The moderators were jumping in and saying, I agree with, all these radically violent views, and I'm going to stoke the fire. And it is BAEN Publishing's, job, because it's their house, to say, hey, we stand for sci-fi fantasy stories, we stand for authors, and we stand for, a safe place where you can read these stories and come together. We don't stand for violence. We don't stand for hate. We don't stand for pushing out other people. We welcome people. And that's what was lost.
And like I said before, they've not been without controversy before. This is not the first time that they've found themselves in a muck. And so, beforehand, the controversy with the anthology, it was, their justification was, well, these are the people who submitted to it. These were the best stories, and we're out publishing the best stories, But as a publisher, somebody, who's thinking about, the world and how diverse it is and how big it is, if you're not thinking about those things, you're not really doing yourself a service anyway in selling your books, because those things matter too. I mean, everything has context and matters. So if you're not doing that, you're not really even doing the part that yours is, like you were saying, that are all about selling books. Well, they're not really they're about selling books to their crowd. It's what they're more saying when they're saying stuff like what they were saying back when they had the anthology problem. This problem's a little different, obviously, very different, but it's the same context. They're just basically putting out blanket statements, and they're really contradicting themselves often with these statements. I mean, that statement I read had several contradictions in it, and so it's very tough it's very tough for them to even justify that they're actively selling stuff.
This sounds like this particular issue with BAEN Publishing, as well as the anthology series, sounds like a very classic issue in media throughout any industry, where they say they have a diversity of thought in the quote unquote writing room, decision room, whatever, when really it's like three people of the same background, and they say, oh yeah, we went to we grew up in different parts of the country, or we went to different colleges, but it's three white guys, right? Yeah. And they say it's a diversity of thought, but they don't really have a diversity of experience, and that's the problem, right? They don't have a woman or a person of color or anything to signify like, hey, maybe, an anthology series of 10 of the exact same type of person isn't the greatest idea. Or, hey, maybe, we should think about the forum that we are cultivating because we have a brand name and it is having hate speech and moderators. Like, maybe we should think about doing something like that. They don't have that kind of diversity of background or experience.
It's a lack of own voices, basically. It's not applying own voices. It's applying voices that might give you that point of view, but those people are basically the same background or the same. They're not coming from a place of experience and personal experience in that respect, and that shows it. It's very obvious, and it was very obvious. I mean, you go back to this controversy and you follow the Twitter stream. I mean, it's super obvious to a lot of people that's what was going on here. So,
Sorry,
you can go ahead.
I was going to say, when I was reading the document, I wasn't really sure what it had to do with sci-fi and fantasy books at all, or the publisher. It just felt like a completely different topic related to American politics and extremist views.
Yeah.
That's...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Something I've noticed about BAEN books a lot. I've seen their booths at a lot of conventions that I've gone to, or around, in my area and everything. And I'll say something about BAEN. I have never seen someone manning one of those booths or signing at one of those booths that is not a white male. And it's sad to say that we are a diverse group when I can actively see that is not the case.
It's tough. Yeah. I mean, We'll approach a little bit more of this on the other side, but I want to get the Indie Connection in here real quick, and then we'll talk a little bit more and say goodbye. But here, this is a little bit softer for everybody, a little Beauty and the Beast for everybody. So enjoy. We'll be right back in about 5 minutes.
Hey guys, C.R. Cannon here from Fiction Atlas Press, bringing you another Indie Connection. Today I'm going to be telling you about some indie books that you might enjoy if you're a fan of Beauty and the Beast. The first book I have for you is called Beauty of the Beast by Rachel L. Demeter. A beast living in the shadow of his past. Reclusive and severely scarred, Prince Adam Delacroix has remained hidden inside a secluded, decrepit castle ever since he witnessed his family's brutal massacre. Cloaked in shadow, with only the lamentations of past ghosts for company, he has abandoned all hope, allowing the world to believe he died on that tragic eve 25 years ago. A beauty in pursuit of a better future. Caught in a fierce snowstorm, beautiful and strong-willed Isabel Rose seeks shelter at a castle, unaware that its beastly and disfigured master is much more than he appears to be. When he imprisons her gravely ill and blind father, she bravely offers herself in his place. Beauty and the Beast. Stripped of his emotional defenses, Adam's humanity reawakens as he encounters a kindred soul in Isabel. Together they will wade through darkness and discover beauty and passion in the most unlikely of places. But when a monster from Isabel's former life threatens their new love, Demrov's forgotten prince must emerge from his shadows and face the world once more. The second book I have for you is called Thief, The Scarred Mage of Roseward, Book 1, by Sylvia Mercedes. A clever thief, a disfigured mage, a kiss of poison. Nell longs for nothing more than to leave behind her thieving ways and pursue a life of honest work. But when her father lands himself neck-deep in debt, she must take on a dangerous job if she hopes to save his life. A job that brings her to the shores of Roseward Isle. For 15 years, Soren Silveria has fought to suppress the nightmarish monster stalking Roseward. His weapons are few and running low, and the curse placed upon him cripples his once unmatched power. Isolation has driven him to the brink of madness, and he knows he won't be able to hold on much longer. When a sharp-tongued, uncouth, and undeniably beautiful young woman shows up on his shore, Soren resolves to drive her away. He won't be responsible for another death. But Nell is equally determined not to be frightened off by the hideously scarred mage, not until she gets what she came for. Can two outcasts thrown together in a tangle of lies discover they are each other's only hope, or will the haunted darkness of Roseward tear them apart? The third book I have for you is called A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. The elves come for two things, war and wives. In both cases, they come for death. 3,000 years ago, humans were hunted by powerful races with wild magic until the treaty was formed. Now, for centuries, the elves have taken a young woman from Luella's village to be their human queen. To be chosen is seen as a mark of death by the townsfolk. A marked 19-year-old Luella is grateful to have escaped as a girl. Instead, she dedicated her life to studying herbology and becoming the town's only healer. That is, until the Elf King unexpectedly arrives for her. Everything Luella had thought she'd known about her life and herself was a lie. Taken to a land filled with wild magic, Luella is forced to be the new queen to a cold, yet blisteringly handsome Elf King. Once there, she learns about a dying world that only she can save. The magical land of Midscape pulls on one corner of her heart. Her home and people tug on another. But what will truly break her is a passion she never wanted. And the last book I have for you is called Unseen Beauty by Emini Thompson. Compelled by magic to bring beauty to the beast, can she end the enchantment without breaking her heart? Fairy cursed to be invisible, 16-year-old parlor maid Claudette craves recognition. Sick of cleaning the same unused rooms in the beast's castle, she has had enough of playing by the rules. But when she lands in a heap of trouble, her wicked superior bestows an unexpected punishment. Find the beast his destined beauty. Unable to resist the magical command, Claudette must find an unfortunate young woman to marry the unlovable monster. But just when she's managed to convince the ugly wretch to mind his manners, her own growing feelings could doom her for an eternity of heartbreak. Can she match-make the greatest love story of all time without sacrificing her dreams? Okay, that's all for me this week. I'll see you next week on Indie Connection. Bye.
Somehow I knew this conversation was going to take us a little bit over time, but that's fine. I was prepared for it. This has been, it is a polarizing thing. I mean, it's not polarizing it's polarizing in its aspects, but we've had a very nice conversation here about it. And I think a lot of what I'm gathering is that, we have to be responsible for what we accomplish and who we are and what we're putting out there. But to a certain extent too, we do put a lot of faith in the choices we make with the publishers, right? So we choose our publisher, we figure out we choose our agents, we choose our PR persons, and all of those things. And all those things, could be vetted. You think you have it all the way vetted, or you think that possibly it's, you have done your due diligence and found the right person that's going to represent you and what you believe in, who you are, and all those things. And that necessarily is not the role of a publisher, but when things like this happen, a lot of what's been telling here is a lot of people who are with BAEN are not removing themselves from BAEN. There are a few that have left, but a few of them have not. And so, looking at it from that perspective, if you're out there vetting a publisher or looking at a publisher, that's a tough thing too. But you have to hold accountable just as much as you're accountable. The publisher has to be equally accountable because they're the ones producing this product for you and backing you up. And so, there's a road there that is very, very slippery and tricky when it comes to being on both sides of this. And I'm curious if you guys, obviously you all have a publisher or you're publishing it yourself or for whatever reasons and putting it out there. And so are you more apt to look a little bit deeper now, or are you thinking, I've done my due diligence and I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at?
I'm a control freak. I self-publish, so I'm in control of absolutely everything to do with my books, and I haven't got a publicist at the moment. So, but yeah, going forward, I would definitely be, after this conversation and reading that, I would be looking more into the background of somebody and where they stood to make sure it aligned with my views. Yeah. Sure.
Did you look at publishing traditionally first or through publishers?
I literally wrote the first book, and then it wasn't until I finished I thought, right, well, I've got the book, what do I do with it? And I did approach a couple of agents of authors that I particularly liked, but whilst doing that, I read an article about somebody, can't remember who it was, who had a series of books that they'd gone with a traditional publisher and they got dropped after the first book or two. And for me, it's more about story, and I'm not about, I just want my story to be finished and for people to have the opportunity to read it. And so I was worried that if I went with a publisher that might happen to me and that I would never be able to publish the rest of the series. So I decided to do it myself.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because it's a tightrope you walk just as much as you're walking with putting your own self out there. You're putting your faith in a publisher, and if they let you down, but you're making money, where does the line blur and draw? Those are the kind of things that you weigh when you're with a publisher. But if they do wrong to a world, how much wrong is it before you decide that I've got to get out of this, even if I'm making hand over fist money, which none of us are, but it could happen. I mean, it could happen. I mean, I hope it happens for all of you. I really do. But yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like weighing all those factors, right? So
Yeah.
even with Alex, you're with a publisher. Sean, are you self-published?
Yep, self-published.
Right. Was that a conscious decision on your part too, or did you look at querying and all the effort that involves that?
For me, it was like I'm a big fan of writing Twitter and following other authors, and every day there's 50 people who go and querying for the 5th year in a row and getting a million rejections, and then other people who are like, I just got signed, and so it's a roller coaster of emotions. Don't ever follow writing Twitter if you have an uneasy stomach. But but for me, I have a very entrepreneurial spirit. I work in startups, and so for me, self-publishing was kind of like starting up my own business, and I was fascinated by kind of those aspects of the business. I think it would be disingenuous to say like any author would be mad about getting a traditional publishing offer, right? It's like, it's the dream, right? Someone pays you to write books, and then they do well and they get in books and you're famous and you go on cool podcast or YouTube series like this, and you talk about writing and books and all that fun stuff, and somebody's paying you to do it, and it's great. I think for me, self-publishing was a way for me to indulge in my impatience of, I didn't want to wait, months and years to have my book out there. I wanted to have it so I could hold it at night and sleep with it and put it next to my nightstand and walk with it everywhere I went.
TMI, Sean, TMI.
I know. But I think in terms of, how self-publishing or choosing an agent or choosing a publicist or publisher, as an author, or even, just as a human being, you spend a lot of your life just like drawing lines in the sand saying, this is a line I'm not going to cross, right? And then all of a sudden you get to that line and you're like, am I willing to cross it now? And that's kind of every step along the way is like, okay, am I willing to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, I stand for this, and that's what I'm going to say on Twitter. And that's the line you either jump or you don't jump, right? Or you draw a line in the sand and say, I'm never going to be with BAEN Publishing, but then tomorrow comes and you get an email from BAEN Publishing saying, hey, we want to publish your book and put it into Barnes and Noble, which you can't, really do as a self-publisher. And you're like, well, is that the line I'm willing to cross, right? And again, it comes back to, and you've heard from all three of us, like, we have hills that we are willing to die on, to use Alex's phrase, and are we actually willing to die on them? And for most authors, that's probably yes. And for someone like BAEN Publishing, it seems like that's a no. They don't have a hill. They want to remove themselves. So I think when we as authors go in and, we find a publisher or decide to use, Amazon, and Amazon's not that great, but they're the easiest way to get a book published. Or if we find a publisher or a publicist or anything like that, we take the time to see, like, is this something that we want to be represented by? And if we don't think about that, and then we hear about these conversations, like Cully, like, she's now going to go back and look at, who she uses or what she uses and say, hey, is this what I want to be associated with? And that's kind of the difference, right? It's, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, but you're willing to go back and say, hey, I made a mistake and I'm going to change it. But for a lot of other people or companies like BAEN Publishing, that's not, they have no conviction about it. They seem to be more interested in about making money. And that's always the line, right? That's always the line of, like, you get to the line, it's like, well, if I cross the line that I don't want to cross, maybe I'll make some money. And that's what you have to deal with. Yeah,
I think it's more like, it's not the fact that they're willing to die on the hill. It's more like they look at the hill and go, oh, that's a fucking climb. I'm not gonna I'm going to stay on flat ground. I think flat ground's safer is what I think. That's how they do it. I mean, I could be wrong, but yeah.
I'm laughing because I tend to bring every one of my characters up to their line. I'm quite cruel to my characters. I like to test them.
Yeah, we don't have enough time to get into that, but that is something else we could get into really about within the context of that idea. But yeah, how about for you, Alex? What are you thinking?
For me, I'm lucky to be, I want to eventually, traditionally publish, be with one of like the big four, or the big three, or however it's going to shake out by the time I actually get there. I would love to do that, even if it doesn't pan out, just to say that I've done that. But I think, I'm very lucky in the series that I'm writing. This wasn't a series that I pitched to False Elf originally. It was actually something that I was having a conversation with John Harkness about. And the Shadow Council Archives was just starting. He was just getting authors writing in the series. And he made the comment, I'm surprised no one wants to write Aleister Crowley. And I just went, me. I'm all over that. And he said, give me the synopsis for the first 4 books. And I had it to him 2 weeks later. And so, it was the chance that I got to jump on. And I've gotten to work with editors. I've gotten to grow as a writer because of this chance. Something I wouldn't have been able to do if I'd have done something like this on my own. And I don't think that personally I am as cut out for self-publishing. I don't create fast enough, honestly, to get things out. Cully, you've got 4 books out in 2 years, and I can't write that fast. I
can't. I can't write that fast. I started it in 2014.
Oh, gotcha.
I had 2.5, almost 3 done before I published the first one.
That's fair.
That's still a good timeline.
Yeah, it's good to get it out there that fast, but I'm lucky to work with a publisher who, you can look at John Harkness's Twitter and his Facebook, and you see his convictions. He's very outspoken, and I don't think there's a lot that I disagree with.
I also believe he's very professional about how he speaks.
Yeah,
that makes a difference too. I think there's something to be said for the idea that you can have conviction, you can have belief, you can, or you could even have non-belief, you could have non-conviction, but in the way you speak is the manner in which context matters. And so if you're saying one thing and then the next sentence you're saying something else, that's hard for people to get behind, right? If your conviction is solid and you write it in you don't just go, I'm going on Twitter at 2 a.m. like we know some people have. We won't mention any names. But you go on 2 a.m. I just woke up and I feel like shit, so I'm going to tell Twitter about it, and I'm going to yell at somebody because I need to yell. That's you. You think about your statements, you vet your statements, you look at it, and it's nothing against Tony and what she said, but there is, if somebody looked at that, if you had an editor edit that statement, I would fire that editor personally. But that would be me. But I'm just saying, you have to think about it, right? You have to step back and think. Don't just react. And John is very, very thoughtful in that respect. He does construct his statements in a manner where it's very professional, and he has somebody vet them if he feels like it's not going to be something, where he might feel like he's being more reactionary, and he might do that himself. He's smart enough to do that. But I do see that in a lot, and there's a lot of people out there. This is an anomaly. This is not. There might be a little bit more norm to this than I might even know or be aware of, but this is an anomaly. This happens, like I said, this is, for some reason, it happens every year in February. I don't know why, I don't know how, but somebody puts their foot in their mouth and off we go, and it just becomes this thing, and it's tough, but ultimately, as you pointed out, Sean, you wanted to do this as an entrepreneur, this is a business, and you have to act professionally in every capacity, and that is whether you believe or not, what is being told to you. If you're being told something, if you're being told that you're misogynistic, if you're being told you're racist, you need to step back and look at that and go, okay, I need to cut that out, and the idea that nobody complained about these forums is wrong. That statement is absolutely wrong, because there are cases out there, and you can look this up. But Rachel, I can't remember her last name, but there's actually people who've been banned from the BAEN bar who have spoken out against people who have made these statements, and those people have been banned. So the idea that they're not vetting people, that's a contradiction in itself. I mean, so you've made a choice to go with the people you've decided to go with. You either stand by that conviction and face the consequences, or you are going to be forever mired in muck, and it's going to be terrible, and it's going to get worse. And this is only the beginning of this, and it's sparked this, and it's crazy to think about how much more could come out of this. But this destroyed the RWA. Anybody who knows the Romance Writers Association story, this is a little nugget like this happened, and it imploded the entire organization. An organization that's been around for almost a century. It imploded them. It destroyed them. They had to rebuild and restructure, and they really haven't even done that yet. It's not even concrete yet enough. We're talking about a very, very powerful organization in the publishing industry. Got destroyed by one incident because they did not handle it properly, or they did not handle it professionally, and it became this thing, and it destroyed it. So, BAEN Books been around since 1984. They've helped a lot of indie authors, and who they've helped is their business. But whether it's not diverse enough or whatever the case may be, that's on them. But they need to take responsibility for that. If they don't get out in front of this, it's already happening. Tony's been removed from several book conventions she was speaking at. I mean, if that's not an indication that you need to police your house and get yourself together, I don't know what is, right?
It's so interesting that an industry that editing is such a core and critical feature, that when it comes to anything other than the physical act of a book, everybody is so opposed to being edited or even self-edited, or even hey, is this a good idea to the person next to them, right?
Yes.
It's just
the ultimate of ironies, right?
Yeah, it's mind bottling,
yes,
to use
really
a phrase from Blades of Glory, So it's just use common sense, but also ask people who don't aren't in your sphere of orbit, hey, is this a good idea? Because you're a publishing house, or you're a writer, or you're a publicist, or you're even an editor. We're talking about personal brands too, right? Ask somebody else who isn't you, and who isn't doesn't have a interest in your life or your economy. Am I doing something right or wrong here? It's to Alex's point earlier, he mentioned the reckoning of J.K. Rowling at some point in the future about her views and being transphobic. I don't think she really asked anybody outside of her circle, hey, am I wrong here?
Yeah. Right.
So I mean, just take the extra 5 minutes and ask somebody else, especially if you're a BAEN Books, or if you're an author. If other indie authors are out there and they're I feel really strongly about an opinion and I want to put it on Twitter. Is this a good idea? Ask somebody else. Write it in a note, send it in a text, and be am I wrong here? And do that before you tweet.
Yeah, that's yes. I've had several conversations like that in recent months for sure, and vetting and all that. But yeah, it's very good. Yeah, very true. I agree with all that. But that being said, we're way over, so have this conversation another time, and I would love to have you all back and talk about it some more. You guys were awesome. Thank you so much. Why don't we go around real quick and just tell everybody where they can find you? Where's the best place they can find you real quick? And if you want to mention your books one more time, I'm totally cool with that. So I'm going to start where I stopped. And so Cully, go first for us, please.
Okay, so I'm on pretty much everything social media wise. Mostly I would say Facebook and Twitter. Probably catch me there. This is the first book in my series, which is A Voice That Thunders, based on Mesopotamian mythology, and it is a character-driven high fantasy. And yes, that's me.
Awesome. All right, Sean.
Sean Valiente, indie author. You can find my book at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, The Lightning Knight, classic fantasy series. If you like that kind of thing, you can find me on Facebook, on an author page, on Twitter, where I talk a lot about writing or basketball or the new Mortal Kombat movie that's coming out, and Instagram. So I'm always happy to talk about anything revolving books, writing, or kind of anything at all.
Nice. College or pro basketball?
Pro basketball mostly, and then once March starts, I'll have lots of opinions.
Nice. We'll talk. All right, Alex.
All right, again, I'm Alexander Gideon. My first book in my Books of the Law series is A Web of Crimson. You can find it on Amazon. It's also on Kindle Unlimited, so if you've got that, you can read it for free. You can find me on Facebook, Alexander G.R. Gideon, on Twitter, at Alexander Gideon, and on TikTok, at Alex Gideon Author. And you can look at my website, alexandergideon.net, and my questionably helpful blog, readasthouwill.com.
Nice, awesome. Yes, one more comment before we go. Again, I just shut up and listened for an hour. Great show. I think it was a great show. I am Joe Compton. If you don't know who I am, you're in the wrong place. Welcome to Go Indie Now, though. If you are just finding us, we really appreciate it. And I'm going to do the thing, so just get ready. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Do all of those wonderful things for us. It really helps us out. It gets us more seen by more people. And I think this conversation deserves to be seen and heard and talked about. So I welcome all of that. And again, I just ask that we be respectful of one another and not attack one another, because if I see that, I'm removing it. I will remove this entire show if I have to do that. And that's a travesty, because this was a great conversation. But that being said, I really appreciate everybody's thoughts on this subject. Obviously, this was a very polarizing. I hate using that word. I should stop that. See, I should think about what I'm about to say. But this was a really thoughtful and interesting conversation, and I really appreciate all of everybody being involved, all the comments and chat and everything like that. Thank you so much. And we've got a lot of great stuff coming up. Our programming is beginning, so next week we're going to have some things going on. I'll talk more about that later on in the day. But for now, remember that it's always time to go indie now. And with that, we will say goodbye, everybody. There's the cover. Look at that beautiful cover. That's an awesome.
Nice cover.
Yay. All right, everybody. Take care.